Hi, I'm Debra Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. On today's podcast, I chat with Vivian Leven, a fear-free certified dog behavior consultant. What's that? Vivian explores the entire family dynamic with the pet. She works to unlock why things are not working out. Hi, it's Debra Hamilton, and welcome again to Why Do Pets Matter? And today I am so grateful for my friend and colleague, Vivian Leven, to be here to speak with my listeners. Welcome, Vivian.
Thank you, Debra. I'm honored to be invited to have this conversation with you.
Well, that's great because you are just the cat's pajamas. Vivian is a certified dog behavior consultant. She also has and does dabble in mediation. So right there, she's my best friend. And she's also fear-free certified. I am on the fear-free advisory board. So we have, if any of you don't know, Dr. Marty Becker started the fear-free program. So you can go to vets who really practice fear-free veterinary medicine. And we may get into that today, or we may have to have Vivian back to talk about that. But I just want to welcome you, Vivian. It's so wonderful to see you. Not that anyone on this podcast knows, but we've been trying to schedule this for the longest time, and just life got in the way. So we are now here, and we are going to enjoy every minute. So, of course, Vivian, before we start doing anything else, you have to answer the one question: why do pets matter to you?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. So even already when I was a child, I'm an only child. I asked for a dog for the longest time, and then it actually, my mother got a dog when my parents divorced. Imagine that. So a Cocker Spaniel puppy when I was 7, and that was my best buddy for many years. And then I got into horses. I had, we had a cat, rabbit. So I've always been interested in animals since I was little. And then I got more into animal welfare, animal rights. And then I've had, just a lifelong connection with animals. And now I'm working with as a behavior consultant. And part of that for me is, I think, sort of understanding animals, helping people understand animals is very rewarding to me, and that animals do well, their welfare, and that they're not, mistreated, misunderstood. It's just a very rewarding thing for me. So it's. Yeah.
So before we got on the air, I was glad to hear that you're doing some mediation beside your certified dog behavior consultant practice. You're doing some mediation, and it has to do with divorce. So let us know a little bit about how your first dog, Cocker Spaniel, who was named
Sambu.
So yeah. How did he or she, a black and white, oh, I love them. My friend had one that was called Oreo, of course. But how did she help you cope with the divorce? And then if you don't mind, in this sort of general way, because we know as mediators, we can never talk specifically about anything. We always have to go to the general. How has that experience really helped you in your experience helping families of divorce, and if there are animals involved?
So Sambo, it was just someone that I played with, would be outside with. I mean, we were just like, obviously it was my mom. I was 7, had the main responsibility, but it was like my playmate, if you will, and that gave a lot of joy, a lot of comfort in many different ways, from cuddling on the couch, playing together, just having someone to, do things with. So I think with the mediation in custody cases I don't necessarily have a lot of, there's not really a lot of connection with what animals those families have. That usually doesn't come up. But for me, it's interesting because some of it, this is maybe jumping to something different, but I do see, like, it's about harmony and communication, and when that falls apart, right, in sort of in these it's basically divorces where children are involved. But I also see that relationship with dogs, when there's certain events happening, or the dog is obviously doing some behavior maybe that the person does not approve of or appreciate, but all behavior is a function, has a function. So the dog is doing it for the reason, and it's about also a conflict and part of it repairing, because it's a relationship. And I think it's important to think of that when we deal with it's easy to say the dog isn't obedient, the dog doesn't do what I want to do. But I mean, ultimately, and I think more and more, we have to think about what is the relationship like, and what do we want out of that relationship, and being mindful that the dog has certain needs and desires too, and how do we work with that?
So in divorce, it really is important, in the cases that I've done, that the animal is considered not yours or mine, but rather, I was interviewed by Bloomberg in 2016, and they used my quote as the main quote, which was, "Unfortunately, your pet doesn't hate your ex." Sort of sums it up. And while you're going through a divorce, or even if this upheaval in COVID, the animals are really having a moment as well. There have been very many cartoons about, "Please get out of the house, you're disturbing my nap time," or there's a lot of fear around, well, when you do go back to work and you've been home for 4 months, how's that dog going to cope? Or the last one is, you adopted a dog because you were home from work, and now they've never even experienced life without you being home. So as a behavior consultant, which I'm so glad you pointed out was a little different than a behaviorist, because a behaviorist would have studied this in college, and what you've done is you've got all the certifications to help look at behavior and help families decide why this dog or cat is doing what it's doing. I'm sure you might work with horses as well, but why is this animal doing what it's doing? And what can we as humans recognize about the relationships or the environment the dog, cat, or horse are in that are creating these behaviors that clearly they don't call you to tell you, "This is the greatest horse I've ever ridden," or "This is the most wonderful dog I've ever walked." It usually is, he's pulling my arm out, or he's, eating the garbage all the time, or my dog the other day, well, not the other day, but for the past 4 months, circles the dining room table. So tell me a little bit about how now, going from divorce, where people have to understand the position of the animal in the family, which they may or may not do in your neck of the woods, they do it in my neck of the woods. But when you're thinking about that upheaval, that emotion, as a behavioral consultant, and you understand that the animal is absorbing all this energy. And how do you first evaluate the animal, and then how do you help the family, or evaluate the family, and then how do you help the family and the animal work together?
Well, so I mean, when you mentioned with COVID and being home all the time, so dogs like routine and structure, and they're used to certain, routine when we go to work, and it's a different routine when we're home. So that's one thing that we worry about now when, things change back again, especially since many people have adopted dogs during this time. What will happen when you go back to work, if you're gonna, be out of the home again, and the importance of really preparing the animal for that, so that they have a routine that they can be home alone. They, we really encourage, treat activity toys, and even if you have kids home, that they can't be, you know, with the animal all the time or the dog all the time. There's certain times that they spend time together, so the dog has rest and has certain times where certain things happen. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, when people now adopt dogs, I mean, they're still working and doing things. It's kind of figuring out what, you know, a rescue dog, if you don't know anything where they came from, it takes some time to build that relationship and find out, you know, what, I mean, if it's a dog and, you know, reactivity on the street is very common, or if the dog has guarding issues, whatever it is, to really find out about the animal and work with it, and realize that it is a commitment. Just because you're home, it's an adjustment period to get that animal to fit into your home, your family, whatever activities you're doing, and that, you know, everybody in the family is on the same page with how to, you know, what those routines and what the structure is. I mean, it's so important to have that routine and structure for a dog.
When you go into a home and the animal is reacting, give us, if you can, generically, what are some of the things that the dog or the cat might be doing that is problematic for the family? And how do you then observe the dog or cat and then speak to as you said, you have to bring the family along so they understand what's creating this perfect storm that they'd like you to help them with?
So you asked me, so a dog reactive to people coming in the home, for example?
Yeah.
So, the first thing we talk about is management, right? Because there's management and training, they kind of go hand in hand. So if you don't have time to work on the issue, then managing it so that we don't have a behavior that keeps repeating over and over again that we really want to get rid of. So that's number one. So we talk a lot about, you know, can the dog be gated away? Can it be in a separate room? Can it be in a crate? And it may just be giving the dog a Kong or something to chew on, have some music or something on as a buffer, and then have people come over if you just want people over and not want to deal with the dog situation, instead of trying to, you know, tell the dog no and try to pull them away and do it. It turns into a big commotion that really just adds more stress and anxiety for the dog when people come over. So that's the first part. And then setting up training sessions where we really set the animal up for success. What do we want this dog to do? And a lot of it, again, it's also an emotional component, of course, because emotion is driving behavior. So a lot of these things the dog doesn't even have much decision-making power over. So it's about making the dog have a positive association with visitors coming over. So then when I work with clients like that, we put a dog away first. I come in, I'm seated. Then the dog comes out on a leash. And I like to, and I may just toss food first to see, you know, on the floor, and I call it find it, just to see, is the dog willing to eat while I'm there? Is the dog willing to focus on the food or more barking at me? If that's the case, we need to increase the distance, because that's what dogs, it's all about space, give me space, right? So we want to see what that distance is so we can work under threshold. And then I'm a big proponent of teaching the dog some really simple activities that the family can start with. It's simple things like touching a wooden spoon, playing catch, just catch a treat in the air. Like I said, the find it, just toss food in different directions. And I want the family, and there's some others, but I want the family to play with the dog like this, so the dog really learns to enjoy these activities. And then I'll come over and I'll play with the dog, so we can kind of create some sort of like the dog there's some predictability in, people come over, I play the games I know, and these are all distant games, so it's not like I'm going to touch the dog or anything like that, until the dog really looks forward to these visits. And then we can start talking about when the dog is a lot more comfortable, they will initiate contact if they are ready. So we never try to approach dogs. And that's something that people like to do because they say, I'm friendly, you know, I want to make friends with you. And then they approach. But no, that really needs to be the dog. When they're ready, when the dog is ready, they approach.
Right. And you know, between rescue dogs and dogs you might get as a puppy, when they're going through their, you know, flight stage and things like that as a puppy, you work them through it. When you get them as an older dog, you don't know what happened during that period. So I love when you said, so you have to make a dog, but really when you explained it, you said you have to allow the dog to find a choice that it can make that serves it. So I love the throwing of the food, find it, because that will distract it from doing the activity, and they're simple activities that can make it a little more difficult for the family. So if you have the frozen Kongs, those are great. I remember when I had my dachshund, and she was always in my face. She was a puppy and she was in my face. And when I went to class, what we did was and it was a behavior modification class. It wasn't an obedience class because she was too young and she was a whack job. She was actually pet related. So she was great with people. Just don't bring another dog around, which was unfortunate because she was a lovely girl, but she thought she was very big. So it made for quite a, you know, you had to be really on your toes with her, even though we did redirect her and we did find ways to shift it. We always, the trainer said, well, why don't you make sure they always have something that they love? So when you said the Kong, it sprang in my mind that she loved those Twizzles, those little circular things that you can give. And so if you know somebody's coming over or the doorbell's about to ring, I know that most people say, well, have the dog sit. And sometimes that's way above the dog's pay grade. They just can't sit when the doorbell goes, right?
Yeah. And sometimes we add stress there because then we insist on the sit and then we get annoyed when they don't. And
it just escalates both for the people who really, why can't I get this right? And I know we'll talk about that in a minute because the stress on people who can't get it right. And I know your temperament. You're like, no, this isn't easy stuff. This is really, you have to be as simple and stress-free as you want the dog, or it's just never going to work because they can't read you because you're totally stressed out. So when we were working with Buff, we would give her this Twizzle and she would lay there and it would be awesome because she would lay there for like 20, 30 minutes. And that was all I needed for a phone call. If the phone rang, and as you said, it's really great. You know, they know that when this happens, the food gets thrown and this is a beautiful game. So when the doorbell rings, if you either give them a Twizzle or you throw the food, you know they're going to be going to get the food and not jumping on your guest as an alternative to the stressful, you know, make them sit, make them behave. I'm like, I'm so into what you said, you know, simple activities, because what we want to do, we want to teach them behaviors that distract them, but that serve them and serve you, because the stress of being pulled down or made to sit or put in a crate or whatever. I mean, I'm a big crate person, so I love crates. And my dogs run into their crates immediately, especially when you bring out the grinder for their nails. And they can hide in the back of those crates. They are Irish setters. And they are so small, they look like little mice because they think if they can't see me, I can't see them. And so I will never grind their nails. It hasn't worked yet, but they still believe it will. But to make the dog feel comfortable, and I think the way you can do that is by making the people feel comfortable. And when you're doing your behavior consulting, it's not always all about the pet. Sometimes it's more about the people. So tell us a little bit about that if it's true. If it's not, tell me, Debra, you're out to lunch.
No, I mean, it's about both because, you know, people sometimes feel bad. Oh, I have a dog that does this. Like, what did I do wrong? And sometimes, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Either, you know, the dog, you know, had some bad experiences or they weren't socialized or, I mean, who knows? And some of it is, frankly, genetics too. You know, a super sensitive dog that it may just take, you know, like you mentioned, nail clipping, one nick of the nail, and then they're, you know, they don't want to do nail clipping anymore, even though nail clipping, usually what people don't understand is you can do it with a puppy and you do it and you do it. And sometimes you nick the nail and then so it starts bleeding or someone else has to help to hold the dog. And over time, you accumulate bad experiences, right? So there comes a certain time, enough repetitions, the dog says, I don't want to do this anymore. That's why with socialization, we talk with puppies, but also with rescue dogs, when we start out, we want to build positive associations to everything, pair good things with everything we want the dog to be good with. And we want them to, again, have, not go over their comfort zone, so stay within their comfort zone and build it gradually, small steps. So going back to, you said what people need to realize is, so one thing is, especially with a lot of these behavioral issues, is that there's an emotion driving a lot of this, whether fear, anxiety, stress, things like that. And then we can't push the animal beyond the pace they're at, right? We need to be on the same page. So small steps, and we are always, and as trainers or behavior consultants, we can fall into that trap too, that we want to push things along faster, right? So, but that's really important to go slow, and for people also to learn reading body language. It's so important. The dog is talking all the time. So anything from, there's the, lip licking, ears going back, the tail. Even when I had that the other week, there's a dog terrified of nail clipping, actually. It's funny. So we just had for a week, just have the nail clipper out on the table, next to the food bowl. The nail clipper is just around until that's not an issue. And then it's just picking it up and then tossing a treat. And then just do that until the dog is fine with that. And then we did the touching exercise at the same time, but separate from the nail clipper. And if the dog backs away, then that's too much, right? And for people, they still kind of want to touch, but it's like, no, don't do it. Just like the dog doesn't get a treat for that, and just do it easier. Maybe your hand just comes up and then the dog gets a treat, and sort of start where the dog is. But we're very goal oriented. So the journey to get there.
Like, I want to get this done faster than
the other. Yeah. But the nice thing is, if you do slow down and people get good at reading the dog's behavior, you build a lot of trust, because a lot of dogs never get the opportunity to say that's too much, right? Because then usually what has happened, then someone will grab them and hold on to them since they're not cooperating, right? And it just causes so much more stress. You can work through a lot of these things fairly easy, but you need to, build the small steps. And when the dog knows, if I back away, I'm not comfortable, then things will get easier. Like, nothing will be pushed on you. And when they understand, they have that communication with you, they're going to be a lot more open to whatever you want to do, because they know you now have this communication system that actually works for them.
Yeah, it's not about brute strength.
No.
Although I always tell my owners, try to set the stage and give them the information you want while they're small, while you still outweigh them, because of the fact that it is harder to stop a 60-pound Irish setter from pulling on the leash than the 15, 20-pound Irish setter. So you really want to start gently guiding at the beginning. And it's interesting, because we're really on this nail thing, which I love. When my dogs come back, they all stand on the table perfectly, like little, soldiers, and nobody's shaking, nobody's upset. And their owners go, how do you do that? And I said, well, because I never grab their feet. I said, I've never grabbed their feet. I said, if you grab their feet, something bad's coming. And I said, they lay their foot in the palm of my hand and I grind their toes. I said, so they know. And I said, if they pull away, I let them. I let them, because too much stress right now, too much, I need a break. Okay, fine. Yep. And then we sit there, we chat, and I turn the grinder off. And then I go, can we maybe try again? And they, give me a kiss, and I go, okay, fine. And I pick up their paw, and if it stays in my hand, I turn on the grinder. If it stays in my hand, I go, okay, we can move forward. Like you said, it's not about speed. So when you're trying to work with a family who is having a certain issue, it's sometimes the ability to communicate. There's no race. This is not fat and skinny, how to race up and down the pillowcase. It's that you really need to understand how your dog is, or cat is assimilating information. And
people, what's interesting is people get that because it relates to themselves too. I mean, I heard I don't remember who said that now, but I thought it was so great. It's like, if you're afraid of someone drawing blood from you, two people in white, coats coming out, holding you down and getting down and say, aren't you happy we got it down really fast? No, you wouldn't be. You would never come back, right? So but I think—
How many people say that about the dentist? You know, this time I'm not going back.
But they're confusing, right? There's a lot of different information out there, and some of it is that you have to be, dominant and the alpha, and dog has to, do what you say you're going to do, kind of thing. There's a lot of mixed messages, but once people learn, to work with the animal, I mean, it does make sense, because we all, if we have some control in what happens to us, we feel a lot safer than if we're out of control what happens to us. And that's just universal.
Yeah, addressing the emotions of both people. So understanding the people sometimes feel as if they failed. And I loved when you said, no, you didn't fail. This is just a fork in the road. And here we are together trying to navigate that fork in the road. Which way are we going to go? Well, between all of us, we're going to figure out which way to go that's going to be the least traumatic for everyone. Like you said, don't hold them down. There's a way to do it that's least traumatic for everyone. And don't push.
Yeah.
It's amazing when I started dog obedience, which is a little sliver of a training in the right way or the wrong way. Sometimes you have good trainers, sometimes you don't. That was the mantra of the second trainer I went to. The first trainer threw empty soda bottles at the dogs on the long sit so they wouldn't move. And I said, somehow I think this isn't good for my dog. And believe me, and I know, Vivian, you are going to absolutely give me kudos for this. If somebody does something to a dog in your obedience class that you wouldn't want done to your dog, leave.
Yeah.
Leave.
Yeah.
Because your dog is watching this and you're watching this. And if both of you think this isn't the way I want to train my dog, I know they have a lot of degrees and I know they have things up on the wall and everything else. Find the trainer or that can really put you on the right path, that makes you feel good. If it doesn't feel right to you, don't go back.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that, well, they're making me do hard things and I don't want to do those hard things. No. If it's hard, that's one thing. And that's why you would call someone like Vivian, who would come over and help you really navigate over that hump. But really, if it's something that doesn't resonate with you, and I have to say I went to a camp with a very well-known trainer, and they had everyone, so I'm older than dirt, Vivian, so they were still doing the ear pinch and the choke to get people to be reliable retrievers. So my Irish setter, Raisin, was the most reliable retriever I ever owned. And the minute I got out of camp, she never retrieved again.
Wow.
Because she said to me, and she showed me 100 times, but when you're young and you're stupid, which now I'm old and I'm hopefully not as stupid. You
old and humble now.
Very humble, very humble. There are people that if you feel it, and that's why I always put this in here when anyone says about a trainer, if you feel that it's not serving you or your dog, you don't have to do it. It doesn't matter that they have every degree. And now, of course, Raisin was born in 1984. So now they don't do ear pinches anymore, or at least most people don't, and they don't do the choke. They throw it and they reward. It's always positive, positive resolution and positive reinforcement. And that's what I loved about the throwing of the food or the swizzle, because if you want to change behavior, and you could use this with your kids too sometimes, rewarding the positive and picking up on the positive will often create that pathway to more positive, instead of always coming down on them and saying, no, that's not the way to do it. So why do pets matter? To Vivian, it's because she really wants to help people live their best life with their pets. I think that's what I'm taking away today, is that you want people to live their best life with their pets. If they're having an issue, call you. Or find
or just a positive, anybody positive, because I agree with behavior. We run into this sometimes, that especially if it's more, if we're talking a dog with a bite history or some more severe behaviors, is that sometimes people feel, and I can't blame them. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, is that I'm going to send my dog to a boot camp and I have a guarantee. They say in 2 weeks it's going to be fixed. And it's very tempting to do that. And I always, when I get some of those clients, it's very important to also not make them feel bad that they did go through with it. I mean, ideally, like you said, they should have heard it and say, I'm not doing that. But you know what? Like, you say you're talking about your age. I'm not that young either, and I actually started in Doberman Rescue. That's how I got into the behavioral, specifically dog behavior consulting. Is that I was in Doberman Rescue, and I had adopted a Doberman who was reactive to people, and also bikes on the bike path and things like that. And I hired a trainer, and I was told to hang him in a choke chain on the bike path, specifically go to the bike path and hang him on a choke chain every time a bike came by, So been there, done that, learned better, but it's very hard because everybody has they want to fix a problem, which makes a lot of sense. And what's the best way to do that? And I'm just hoping that people, find that this.
Now that we're past that point, and some people still, I guess, maybe training that way. However, most people now recognize that there's a reason why that dog's reactive. And if you unlock that cause, which is what you do by watching what the dog does right before you talked about the body language. Body language is key. I always know when my dog, Junie, my youngest, is going to go into orbit over a squirrel or a cat or a chipmunk. And I sit there, and I have gotten to the point where I know it. And if I don't catch it soon enough, and he, is like a spring, he ejects himself, and you're like, holy Toledo. I really just take a moment and I hold his face. So in the dog show world, we hold under their throat, and I hold him, and he's going into orbit, and he's spinning, and I'm just quietly rubbing his cheek, because I know at this point his amygdala is way in control of his entire body. His little amygdala, which is there somewhere, is in control of his entire body, and his prefrontal cortex is gone. So as we know in people, you don't really answer things correctly. So yes, he just needs time to get, okay, the squirrel's gone. Okay. And I have to tell you, the other piece that you mentioned, which was so funny, in my neighborhood, some gentleman opened a business where he not only found you a purebred dog from a high reputable breeder, which wasn't necessarily true, but I digress. He then would train it for you and send it to doggy daycare. So he had the triple hat play, whatever it's called. He would get you to buy the dog from him at a high markup. He would then train the dog for you at an incredible price. And then he would have you leave it there with him all day, so you didn't have to put up with it because you couldn't do what he did. And I know, Vivian, you and I both refer to people and say, I can take your dog and train it, but then it will only do things for me. Because what works in training is that you have to learn how to read your dog so you can get your dog to do what it is you want them to do. And it's time consuming, and it's
your relationship, right? I mean, that's what it's
complete relationship. About. It is watching your dog when you're walking down the street and knowing that in that brain, sometimes I try to be a step ahead of him, and sometimes I am, which is very cool. And then I turn around when the cat is coming out of the driveway, and I go, okay, you didn't see it. We're turning this way. We're going to miss that whole entire screaming scenario, because it really, you just have to read. I am so grateful you were here. For the listeners in the podcast, I always try to pull three things out. So the most important piece, I think, is to be prepared, you prepared, and your pet prepared for learning how to read each other, learning how to have a relationship. That is like the most important piece. And then manage and train them. And if you don't have a good handle on managing and training, there are tons of books out there, but you can call someone like Vivian to come in and really help you get started, because you just might need a few tips. And then finally, please, God, please, always believe you're going to be successful. Because if you don't, then that's going to take you twice as long to get past this conduct in your pet that's driving you nuts. If you think he'll never be trained, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, Vivian. I'm sure you agree. But if you believe that you can redirect him, so I never think about it being as training, as much as I think it is redirection. Because as you probably learned with your reactive Doberman, it was redirecting her or him when she was reactive, not stringing her up.
Yeah, and building different associations, and that's another thing for people. Like, it's so fascinating. Be curious about it, learn about your dog. I mean, there's so much, I always feel people that have more problematic dogs, many times grow closer to their dogs because they really need to figure things out and learn about their dog in a very different way, so sort of enjoy the journey as much as you can, even though it has bumps in the road, but it can be a very rewarding thing, and you learn so much. And
it's an adventure, and you know
Mhm.
what, you learn a lot about yourself too.
Very true, very true.
And it's always, if you take the time, they will always make you your best self.
Mhm.
There's a quote that Roger Harris has, and I hope I remember it now that at least I remembered his name, so you can look it up. But our dogs are not our whole life, but they make our lives whole.
Mm.
And that goes across the board, because they do make our lives whole, no matter where we are, what we're doing, especially now during COVID, whether it's a dog or a cat. I always make sure I include that, because, cats are just as much a part of our lives. They can be
Yes.
a little naughtier, and they can be a little more curious on how to shift behaviors, but that can happen too. And maybe we'll have you back, Vivian, to talk simply about cats. That would be great.
Yep, sounds good.
The Why Do Pets Matter podcast drops every Thursday and can be found on whichever platform you find your podcasts. Subscribe now, invite your friends, and I cannot wait to have you join me in these conversations.